How do you teach someone the true cost of betrayal without ever raising your voice? My sister called caring for Dad a thankless job, then quietly shipped him off and started treating his home like her own. She thought I was too busy to notice, until the day I took back every single thing she thought she'd stolen for good. The familiar weight of my suitcase felt heavier as I dragged it up the worn stairs to Dad's third-floor apartment. 3 months in Denver, overseeing a construction project had felt endless, but I'd finally wrapped up early and decided to surprise everyone with an unannounced return. The hallway smelled the same, coffee and old wood polish, but something felt off the moment I reached Dad's door. I knocked twice, then used my key. "Dad, it's Ethan. I'm back early." Silence. Not the comfortable quiet of an afternoon nap, but the hollow emptiness of abandonment. The living room looked wrong. Dad's favorite recliner sat in its usual spot by the window, but his reading glasses weren't on the side table. The stack of library books he always kept nearby had vanished. Even his coffee mug, the chipped blue one he'd used every morning for 15 years, was nowhere to be seen. "Walter, you home?" I called louder, walking toward his bedroom. The bed was made with military precision, but the prescription bottles that usually crowded his nightstand were gone. So were the framed photos of Mom that he kept close. A soft knock at the door interrupted my growing confusion. Linda Mayfield, the building superintendent, peered in with the cautious expression of someone delivering bad news. "Ethan, honey, I didn't expect you back so soon." Linda had managed this building for 20 years and treated all the long-term residents like family. "I thought you knew." "Knew what? Where's my father?" Linda's weathered face crumpled with sympathy. "Your sister moved him out last week. Said it was for the best, that he needed professional care. She had all the paperwork." The words hit me like cold water. "Moved him where?" "Sunset Manor, over on Elm Street. She seemed to think you'd approved it." Linda reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Walter asked me to give you this if you came looking for him. He seemed confused about the whole thing." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note in Dad's careful script. "Ethan, if you're reading this, Heather says I have to go to the home because I'm too much trouble. She says you agreed, but you're too busy to visit. I don't understand. I thought we had more time. The rental agreement is in the kitchen drawer. I never signed anything else." Dad attached was a copy of Dad's original rental agreement from 1998, with a handwritten addendum from 3 years ago when he'd added my name as emergency contact and co-tenant. His signature was shaky but clear. 20 minutes later, I stood in the driveway of Heather's suburban home, my sister's silver Lexus gleaming beside Kyle's work truck. Through the front window, I could see movement in the living room, Heather gesturing animatedly while Kyle nodded along. I rang the doorbell, still clutching Dad's note. Heather Turner Scott opened the door with the bright, artificial smile she reserved for difficult clients. At 38, my younger sister had perfected the art of looking perpetually put together, her auburn hair styled in the kind of sleek bob that required weekly maintenance. Today she wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Dad's monthly medication budget. "Ethan, what a surprise. I thought you weren't coming back until next month." "Where's Dad, Heather?" Her smile flickered but held. "Oh, that. Come in. Let's talk properly." She stepped aside, ushering me into the living room where Kyle Scott sat hunched over his laptop. My brother-in-law looked up briefly, offering a weak wave before returning his attention to whatever HVAC supply catalog held his interest. "Kyle, say hello to Ethan," Heather prompted with the tone of someone addressing a distracted child. "Hey, man. Good trip?" Kyle's response was automatic, disinterested. At 40, he'd settled into the comfortable routine of agreeing with whatever Heather decided was best for everyone. "Heather, where is our father?" I repeated, remaining standing despite her gesture toward the couch. She sighed dramatically, settling into her favorite armchair, the expensive leather one she'd bought after landing her biggest real estate commission. "Sit down, Ethan. You're being dramatic." "I'm being dramatic? Dad's apartment is empty. The building super says you moved him to a nursing home. Without telling me." "Without telling you?" Heather's laugh was sharp. "When exactly was I supposed to tell you? You've been in Denver for 3 months? 3 months, Ethan? Do you have any idea what it's been like dealing with Dad's needs while you're off playing project manager?" Kyle shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I've been working, Heather. Earning money to help support." "Support what? Dad's rent? His groceries? Because I've been handling all of that while you send the occasional check." She stood up, pacing to the window with the practiced movements of someone delivering a well-rehearsed speech. "Do you know what caring for an elderly person is really like? It's the most thankless job in the world. Phone calls at all hours, emergency room visits, medication schedules, grocery shopping because he can't manage the stairs with heavy bags anymore. I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued, her voice rising. I solved that problem, Ethan. Dad is safe, he's being cared for by professionals, and frankly, he's probably better off. Sunset Manor has trained staff, proper medical facilities, social activities with people his own age. Did you ask him what he wanted? Did I ask a 71-year-old man with early-stage dementia what he wanted? Heather's tone dripped condescension. Sometimes adults have to make hard decisions, Ethan. I know that's difficult for you to understand, given how often you're actually present for family responsibilities. Kyle finally looked up from his laptop. She handled all the paperwork, man. It was a lot of stuff. Legal documents and medical forms. Heather knows about that kind of thing. What paperwork? Dad never mentioned wanting to leave his apartment. Heather returned to her chair, smoothing her skirt with deliberate calm. Dad mentions a lot of things. Last week he asked me when Mom was coming home from her bridge game. Mom's been gone for 6 years, Ethan. The casual cruelty of that statement hit harder than her earlier accusations. That doesn't mean... It means he's not capable of making rational decisions about his living situation. I had him evaluated by a geriatric specialist. Dr. Patterson confirmed that Dad needs supervised care. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to Dad's contact. I'm calling him. Good luck with that. Sunset Manor has restricted phone access during adjustment periods. It helps new residents settle in without constantly wanting to go home. Heather's smile returned, sharper now. You can visit him this weekend if you want. Visiting hours are Saturday and Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. The dismissal in her voice was unmistakable. I was being granted permission to see my own father, on her terms, according to her schedule. My phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat, the thread Heather had created years ago for important family updates. She'd just posted a photo, herself sitting in Dad's old recliner, feet up, laptop open on her knees. The caption read, "Finally got my new office set up. Sometimes change is exactly what everyone needs. Fresh start at our new beginnings." I stared at the image, then at my sister. You're using Dad's apartment as an office. The space was sitting empty, Ethan. Dad's lease runs through the end of the year, and someone needs to sort through his belongings anyway. I'm handling the estate organization. She gestured vaguely toward Kyle. Kyle's been helping me move some of the furniture around to make it more functional. Estate organization? Dad isn't gone, Heather. No, but he's not coming back to that apartment either. Be realistic. She stood up, smoothing her blazer with the finality of someone ending a business meeting. I know this is a lot to process, especially since you haven't been involved in the day-to-day decisions. But everything's handled now. Dad is safe, the apartment situation is resolved, and you can go back to your project management without worrying about emergency phone calls. Kyle closed his laptop and stood as well, clearly recognizing the cue that this conversation was over. We should probably get dinner started soon, babe. I looked between them, my sister radiating the satisfied confidence of someone who'd solved a complex problem, my brother-in-law already mentally moving on to his evening routine. Neither seemed to grasp the magnitude of what they'd done. I want to see all the paperwork, I said finally. Heather's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, I'll make copies for you. It might take a few days to gather everything together. As I drove away from their house 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with another group chat notification. This time, it was a video. Heather giving someone a virtual tour of Dad's apartment. Panning across the living room she'd rearranged to accommodate a makeshift desk setup. Her voice was cheerful, excited even. And this is my temporary workspace while I handle some family business. It's got amazing natural light, and the location is perfect for client meetings downtown. I pulled over and watched the video twice, noting how she'd already replaced Dad's reading lamp with her own modern desk light, how his old TV had been moved to make room for her printer, how completely she'd erased any trace of the man who'd lived there for over 2 decades. The neighbor's envelope crinkled in my pocket as I reached for my phone to call Sunset Manor. Whatever Heather thought she'd accomplished, whatever paperwork she claimed to have, I had a feeling Dad's handwritten note was going to matter more than she realized. Sunset Manor squatted on Elm Street like a beige brick monument to institutional efficiency. The lobby smelled of industrial disinfectant and cafeteria vegetables, with artificial flower arrangements doing little to soften the harsh fluorescent lighting. I signed the visitor's log, noting that I was the first person to visit Walter Turner since his admission 8 days ago. I found Dad in the common room, sitting alone at a small table by the window. He'd lost weight. His cardigan hung loose on his shoulders, and his usually neat hair looked unkempt. When he saw me, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Ethan, I wasn't sure if you knew where I was." His voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain. I pulled up a chair beside him. "I'm sorry, Dad. I came as soon as I found out." "Heather said you were very busy with work. She said this place would be better for me, that I was becoming too much trouble." He gestured around the sterile room where a few other residents sat staring at a television mounted too high on the wall. "The nurses are nice, but I don't understand why I couldn't stay home." "What exactly did Heather tell you?" Dad's brow furrowed with the effort of remembering. "She came over with a lot of papers, said there had been a family meeting about my living situation. She said you and Kyle had agreed that I needed professional supervision." He looked at me with the hopeful expression of someone seeking reassurance. "But we didn't have a family meeting, did we?" "No, Dad, we didn't." Relief flickered across his features, followed quickly by anger. She kept saying I was confused, that I didn't remember things correctly. But I remember that meeting never happened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She needed the space, Ethan. She kept talking about how much the apartment meant to her, how she could use it for her real estate business." The pieces began forming a picture I didn't want to see. "What else did she say?" "That you were too busy to take care of me properly. That your job required too much travel." Dad's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "She said I should be grateful someone in the family was willing to handle my affairs." I spent the next hour listening to Dad recount the past 3 months. Months when I'd been focused on the Denver project, trusting that everything at home was stable. Heather had indeed been visiting regularly, but her help had come with a steady stream of complaints about the burden she was carrying and pointed comments about my absence. As I drove home from the nursing home, memories surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Family dinners where Heather had dominated conversation with detailed accounts of Dad's minor medical appointments, her tone suggesting heroic sacrifice. Phone calls where she'd sighed dramatically about handling everything alone while I was traveling for work. I'd been grateful for her involvement, even admiring. It had seemed like she'd finally stepped up to share family responsibilities that had traditionally fallen to me as the older sibling. Now I realized those conversations had been carefully constructed performances, building a narrative that justified what she'd already decided to do. The next morning, I suggested meeting Heather for coffee at Brewster's, the neutral ground where we'd had family discussions since we were teenagers. She arrived 15 minutes late, sliding into the booth across from me with the harried efficiency of someone fitting a minor obligation into a busy schedule. "I'm glad you want to talk about this properly," she said, ordering a complicated latte from the waitress. "I know the transition has been hard, but you'll see it was the right decision." "Dad says you told him there was a family meeting about his living situation." Heather stirred her coffee with deliberate precision. "There were multiple conversations, Ethan. Just because you weren't physically present doesn't mean your opinions weren't considered." "What opinions? You never asked me what I thought about moving Dad to a nursing home." "I didn't need to ask. Your actions spoke clearly enough." Her tone sharpened. 3 months in Denver, Ethan. 3 months of me handling every single crisis while you sent the occasional text asking how things were going. I was working. That job paid for Dad's medications, and that job paid for you to avoid dealing with the reality of Dad's condition. She leaned forward, her real estate agent smile replaced by something colder. "Do you know what it's like to get a phone call at midnight because Dad fell in the bathroom? Or to spend your Saturday morning in the emergency room because he forgot to take his pressure medication?" "Those things happened twice, Heather, and I came back early both times." "Twice that you know about. There were other incidents, smaller ones, that I handled without bothering you because I knew you were busy with your important project." She emphasized the last 2 words with subtle mockery. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to our text history. "You never mentioned other incidents?" "Because I didn't want to worry you. I thought I was being considerate." Heather's laugh was brittle. "Apparently, I should have documented every single moment of caregiving for your approval." The waitress refilled my coffee, and I used the interruption to study my sister's face. There was something rehearsed about her indignation, as if she'd anticipated this conversation and prepared her responses. "Dad seems to think you were more interested in his apartment than his welfare." Heather's composure cracked slightly. "That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves he needs professional care. I've been using the apartment to sort through his belongings and handle his affairs. Someone has to organize 25 years of accumulated possessions. By rearranging his furniture and setting up your own office? By being practical about space utilization while I work." She straightened in her seat, regaining her professional demeanor. "The apartment has excellent natural light and a convenient location for client meetings. Since it's sitting empty anyway, it makes sense to use it productively." "It's not sitting empty. It's Dad's home." "It was Dad's home, Now it's a resource that needs to be managed efficiently. Heather checked her watch with the pointed gesture of someone with more important places to be. I understand this is difficult for you to accept, especially since you haven't been involved in the day-to-day realities. But Dad is better off at Sunset Manor, and the apartment situation is handled. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, replaying our conversation and trying to reconcile this version of my sister with the woman I'd grown up with. The Heather I remembered had been competitive and strong-willed, but not cruel. This new version spoke about Dad like he was a business problem to be solved rather than our father. That afternoon, I drove past Cheryl Harris's gym on Maple Street. Through the large front windows, I could see into the small office behind the reception desk. There, mounted on the wall, was Dad's old television, the 32-inch Samsung he'd bought 3 years ago to replace the ancient set that finally stopped working. I parked and walked inside. The gym was mostly empty, just a few people on treadmills and someone using the weight machines. Cheryl stood behind the reception counter, scrolling through her phone. At 33, she had the lean build and perpetual tan of someone who'd turned fitness into a lifestyle brand. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "Nice TV in your office. That's a good model." Now she glanced up, taking in my appearance with the quick assessment of someone evaluating a potential customer. "Thanks. It was a gift from a friend." "Recent gift?" "Last week, actually. Why?" I didn't answer directly. "Mind if I ask what friend?" Cheryl's expression shifted from friendly to wary. "Is there something you need, or are you just here to ask weird questions about my office equipment?" Through the office doorway, I could see other items that looked familiar. A coffee maker that might have been Dad's, a small microwave that definitely was. The serial number sticker was still visible on the side, and I remembered Dad carefully recording those numbers in his little notebook for warranty purposes. "Just curious about where people find good deals on electronics these days," I said, backing toward the door. "Thanks for your time." As I drove home, I made a mental list of everything I'd seen in Cheryl's office. The TV, definitely Dad's. The microwave, almost certainly. The coffee maker could have been anyone's, but the timing was suspicious. If Heather was giving away Dad's belongings while claiming to organize his affairs, what else had she decided he no longer needed? That evening, I walked through Dad's apartment building, noting how different it felt with him gone. In the lobby, I ran into Mrs. Kowalski from 2B, who'd known our family for years. "Such a shame about your father," she said, shaking her gray head, "though I suppose your sister knows best about these things." "What do you mean?" "Well, she's been here almost every day since he left, going through his things. Very thorough, that girl. Yesterday I saw her loading boxes into her car. Looked like she was donating clothes to charity." Mrs. Kowalski's expression suggested approval of such practical efficiency. "Did she mention what else she was planning to do with his belongings?" "Oh, she said she was making sure everything went to people who could use it properly. Very thoughtful. Though I was surprised to see that nice young man from the gym helping her load furniture last weekend." I thanked Mrs. Kowalski and continued upstairs, my suspicions crystallizing into something harder and angrier. Heather wasn't just using Dad's apartment as a temporary office. She was systematically emptying it, distributing his possessions according to her own judgment about who deserved what. Back in my own apartment, I opened my laptop and started a new document. If Heather wanted to play the role of family administrator, she was about to discover that administration required documentation, accountability, and approval from other stakeholders. Starting with the stakeholder she'd apparently forgotten existed. The next morning, I drove to Westfield Industrial Park, where Kyle's HVAC supply company occupied a sprawling warehouse that smelled of metal and machine oil. I found him in the break room, heating up leftover pizza in a microwave I recognized immediately. Dad's old Panasonic with the dented corner from when he'd dropped it while moving apartments 15 years ago. "Hey, Ethan." Kyle looked up with mild surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Nice microwave," I said, settling into a plastic chair across from him. Kyle glanced at the appliance as if noticing it for the first time. "Oh, that. Yeah, Heather brought it in last week. Said your dad had extras he didn't need anymore." "Extras?" "You know how old people accumulate stuff. She said he had 2 microwaves and this one was just taking up space." Kyle's tone was casual, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. She thought it would be useful here since our old one broke. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo from Dad's apartment, one I'd taken during my last visit before the Denver trip. The Panasonic sat on Dad's kitchen counter, clearly his only microwave. Kyle stared at the photo for a long moment, his jaw working silently. Maybe I misunderstood what she said. Maybe you did. I kept my voice level, non-accusatory. "Oh, what other extras did Dad apparently have?" "Look, man, I don't keep track of every little thing. Heather handles that stuff. Kyle's defensive tone suggested this conversation was making him uncomfortable. She said your dad was downsizing anyway, moving to the nursing home and all. Did she mention that he didn't want to move to the nursing home? Kyle's pizza sat forgotten as he processed this information. She said it was a family decision, that everyone agreed it was best for him. Everyone except Dad. And me. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of Dad's stolen microwave. Kyle had always been a follower, content to let Heather make decisions for both of them, but he wasn't malicious, just weak and easily led, which made him useful for gathering information. Kyle, what exactly has Heather told you about Dad's situation? He shifted in his chair, clearly wishing this conversation was happening somewhere else. She said he was getting confused, forgetting things, that he needed professional care and you were too busy with work to help out. Kyle paused, seeming to realize how that sounded. Not that she blamed you or anything. She understood about your job. How understanding of her. She's been really stressed about the whole thing, Ethan, spending all her time dealing with his apartment, sorting through his stuff, making sure everything gets handled properly. Kyle's tone suggested he was repeating Heather's own words. She said it was like having a second full-time job. I'm sure it was exhausting, deciding who gets what from Dad's belongings. Kyle's face reddened. It's not like that. She's trying to make sure stuff doesn't go to waste. Your dad can't use most of his things at the nursing home anyway. Did she ask him what he wanted to keep? Did she ask me? I don't know about that part. Kyle stood up, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. Look, maybe you should talk to Heather about the details. I just help with the heavy lifting when she needs it. After leaving the warehouse, I drove to Cheryl's gym with a more specific purpose. The afternoon crowd was larger than yesterday, giving me better cover to observe the office area without attracting attention. I signed up for a day pass and spent 20 minutes on a treadmill that offered a clear view through the office doorway. The inventory had grown. In addition to Dad's TV and microwave, I could now see a small refrigerator that looked suspiciously like the one from Dad's bedroom, the mini fridge he used to keep his medications cool and store late-night snacks. There was also a desk lamp with a distinctive brass base that I remembered from Dad's reading corner. When Cheryl stepped away from the reception desk to help someone with equipment, I walked closer to the office. Through the doorway, I could see a cardboard box labeled Walter's Kitchen Stuff in Heather's neat handwriting. The box was open, revealing Dad's good silverware set, the one Mom had saved for special occasions and Dad had continued using for Sunday dinners. Finding everything okay? Cheryl had returned, her tone friendly but watchful. Great facilities, I said. I was just admiring your office setup. Very efficient use of space. Thanks. I've been lucky to have friends help me get it organized. She smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd received unexpected generosity. Amazing how much good stuff people have sitting around unused. Amazing, I agreed. Your friend must be very generous. She really is, always thinking about how to help people out. Cheryl's expression suggested genuine affection for her benefactor. She says it makes her happy to see things go to people who will actually use them instead of just collecting dust. I nodded and returned to my workout, but my mind was cataloging everything I'd seen. Dad's belongings weren't being donated to charity or stored for his eventual return. They were being distributed to Heather's friends like party favors. And from Cheryl's perspective, she was simply the grateful recipient of a friend's thoughtfulness. That evening, I returned to Dad's building and spoke with Linda in her superintendent's office. The small room was cluttered with maintenance schedules and tenant files, but Linda's memory was sharp and her observations detailed. Your sister's been very busy, Linda confirmed, almost every day since your father left. Usually comes in the afternoon with boxes or her husband's truck. Have you seen what she's taking out? Furniture, mostly. That nice bookshelf from his living room, the small desk from his bedroom. She said she was donating things to help other families. Linda's expression suggested approval mixed with mild concern. Though I was surprised she took the refrigerator. Seemed like something he might need if he ever came back for visits. She took his refrigerator? The big one from the kitchen. Had Kyle and another man help load it into a truck yesterday? Linda consulted a small notebook where she tracked building activities. She also changed the locks and had her name added to the mailbox. Said she needed secure access while handling his affairs. The casual mention of changed locks hit me like a physical blow. Heather hadn't just moved Dad out. She'd effectively claimed ownership of his home, erasing his presence and establishing her own. Did she file any paperwork with building management about the lease transfer? Linda shook her head. She said that was being handled through lawyers, but we haven't received any official documents. Your father's lease runs through December, and as far as our records show, he's still the primary tenant. Back in my own apartment, I spread Dad's rental agreement and the attached handwritten note across my kitchen table. The original lease was straightforward, a standard residential agreement with Dad as the sole tenant. But the addendum from 3 years ago was more interesting. When Dad had added me as emergency contact, he'd also included language about co-tenancy in case of medical incapacity. I photographed every page, then locked the originals in my file cabinet. If Heather thought she could claim Dad's apartment through possession and assumption, she was about to learn the difference between taking something and legally owning it. My phone buzzed with another family group chat notification. This time, it was a photo of Heather and Cheryl at some kind of social gathering, both holding wine glasses and smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Great evening with wonderful friends. So grateful for people who appreciate the good things in life. Friendship, gratitude, new beginnings." I stared at the image, noting the background details. They were in someone's living room, and behind them I could see a familiar bookshelf. Dad's oak bookcase that had held his collection of history books, and Mom's old photo albums. The same bookcase Linda had seen Heather remove from the apartment yesterday. The pattern was becoming clear. Heather wasn't just using Dad's apartment or storing his belongings. She was systematically redistributing his life to people she wanted to impress or reward. Dad's possessions had become her currency for building social relationships and demonstrating her own generosity. But currency implies ownership, and Heather's ownership claims were about to be tested by someone who understood the difference between possession and legal right. I opened my laptop and began researching elder care law, property rights, and the specific procedures for challenging unauthorized asset transfers. If Heather wanted to play administrator, she was about to discover that real administration required documentation, authorization, and accountability to other family members, starting with the family member who'd been quietly gathering evidence while she celebrated her newfound generosity. Attorney Natalie Barnes operated from a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, 3 blocks from Sunset Manor. Her office retained the original hardwood floors and crown molding, but the walls were lined with law books and filing cabinets that spoke to 40 years of family practice. At 57, Natalie had handled 3 generations of local families through divorces, estate planning, and property disputes. "Walter Turner," she said, pulling a thick file from her cabinet. "I haven't seen your father in 2 years, but I remember him well. Very methodical man, always brought organized documentation." She settled behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose. "What can I help you with, Ethan?" I explained the situation carefully, sticking to facts and avoiding emotional commentary about Heather's motivations. Natalie listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Do you have the original rental agreement?" she asked when I finished. I produced Dad's documents, including the handwritten note and the co-tenancy addendum. Natalie examined each page carefully, paying particular attention to the signatures and dates. "This is interesting," she murmured, pointing to the addendum language. "Your father was quite specific about maintaining control of his living situation. The co-tenancy clause only activates if he's medically incapacitated to the point of being unable to make decisions, and only with your consent as the designated co-tenant. What about the nursing home placement? That depends entirely on how it was arranged. If your sister used some form of power of attorney or guardianship, we'd need to see those documents." Natalie leaned back in her chair. "But if she simply convinced your father to sign admission papers under pressure or false pretenses, that's a different matter entirely." I described my conversation with Dad, his confusion about the supposed family meeting, and his clear statement that he'd never wanted to leave his apartment. "That suggests potential coercion or misrepresentation." Natalie made more notes. "What about his belongings? You mentioned your sister has been removing items from the apartment. She's giving them away, to friends, her husband's workplace, apparently whoever she thinks deserves them." I pulled out my phone and showed Natalie the photos I'd taken at Cheryl's gym and the social media posts. Natalie's expression hardened as she reviewed the images. "This is problematic. Even with legitimate power of attorney, disposing of someone's personal property without their consent or clear necessity requires proper documentation and often court approval. So, what can I do? First, we need to see exactly what legal authority your sister claims to have. Has she mentioned any specific documents? Power of attorney, guardianship papers, medical directives?" I shook my head. "She just says she handled all the paperwork, and that Dad needed professional care." Then we start by requesting copies of any documents she filed to authorize the nursing home placement and property management. Natalie opened a fresh legal pad. "In the meantime, I suggest documenting everything you've observed. Missing items, unauthorized apartment access, any statements your sister has made about her authority." What about getting Dad out of the nursing home? If he was placed there without proper legal authority and against his wishes, yes, we can challenge that. But we need to be methodical. Natalie's tone was measured, professional. Your sister clearly believes she has the right to make these decisions. We need to determine whether that belief has any legal foundation. After leaving Natalie's office, I drove to First National Bank, where Dad had maintained accounts for 30 years. The branch manager, Patricia Vance, remembered our family from years of routine transactions. I'm concerned about my father's accounts, I explained. He's been placed in a nursing home, and I want to make sure his finances are being handled properly. Patricia pulled up Dad's account information on her computer, her expression growing concerned as she reviewed the recent activity. There have been several large withdrawals in the past month, she said carefully, all properly authorized with your sister's power of attorney signature. Power of attorney? Yes, she provided documentation giving her authority to manage your father's financial affairs. Patricia turned her monitor so I could see the transaction history. The largest withdrawal was $8,000 3 weeks ago, followed by several smaller amounts. My stomach dropped as I scanned the entries. The $8,000 withdrawal was dated 2 days before Dad's nursing home admission. Subsequent withdrawals ranged from $500 to just $500, all signed by Heather. Can I see a copy of the power of attorney document? Patricia hesitated. I can provide general information about account activity to family members, but specific legal documents would need to be requested through your sister or your father directly. What if the power of attorney was obtained improperly? That would be a legal matter requiring court intervention. Patricia's tone became more formal. If you have concerns about unauthorized access to your father's accounts, I'd recommend consulting with an attorney. I thanked Patricia and left the bank with a growing sense of urgency. Heather hadn't just moved Dad and taken his apartment. She'd gained control of his finances and was systematically draining his accounts while distributing his possessions. My next stop was the county clerk's office, where property transfers and legal documents were filed as public record. The clerk, an efficient woman named Janet Morrison, helped me search for any recent filings involving Dad's name or address. Nothing here, Janet said after checking multiple databases. No property transfers, no guardianship petitions, no conservatorship filings. Are you sure the documents were filed in this county? What would it mean if someone was acting with power of attorney but hadn't filed the proper paperwork? Depends on the specific situation, but generally speaking, certain actions require court approval even with valid power of attorney. Moving someone to institutional care against their will, disposing of their property, accessing their finances, those are significant decisions that often need judicial oversight. Armed with this information, I returned to Natalie's office that afternoon. No public filings, I reported. And the bank says Heather has power of attorney, but they won't show me the document. Natalie nodded grimly. That suggests she may have a power of attorney document, but it might not have been properly executed, or might exceed its legal scope. She pulled out a standard form. I'm going to file a request for copies of any legal documents your sister used to authorize her actions. She'll be required to produce them within 10 days. What if she refuses? Then we petition the court for emergency intervention on grounds of potential elder abuse and unauthorized asset conversion. Natalie's tone was matter of fact. Your sister seems to believe she has broad authority to make decisions about your father's life. We're about to test whether that authority actually exists. That evening, I returned to Dad's apartment building with a specific purpose, using my key, which still worked despite Heather's lock change claim. I entered the apartment and systematically photographed every room. The space looked different each time I visited, with more of Dad's belongings disappearing and Heather's personal items taking their place. Her laptop sat open on Dad's dining table, surrounded by real estate marketing materials and client files. A coffee maker I didn't recognize occupied the counter space where Dad's old one used to sit, the same one I'd seen in Cheryl's gym office. Heather's business cards were scattered across Dad's reading desk, and her jacket hung in the closet where Mom's old coats had been stored for sentimental reasons. I photographed everything, including serial numbers on remaining appliances and empty spaces where familiar items used to sit. In Dad's bedroom, I found boxes labeled in Heather's handwriting, Donate, Storage, Cheryl, and Kyle's work. The boxes designated for other people contained items I remembered from childhood. Mom's good china in the Cheryl box, Dad's tool collection in the Kyle's work box. But the most damning discovery was a notebook lying open on Dad's nightstand. In Heather's neat script, she'd written what appeared to be an inventory list with assigned recipients. TV, large, Cheryl's gym microwave, Kyle's work bookshelf, Cheryl's apartment kitchen table, donate recliner, storage, for my house later, photo albums, keep, scan, and dispose, tools, Kyle China set, Cheryl. The list continued for 2 pages, dividing Dad's entire life among people who weren't family members. At the bottom, she'd written, "Apartment cleared by end of month. Lease transfer paperwork pending." I photographed every page of the notebook, then carefully returned it to its original position. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Heather. "Stop by Dad's place to grab some files. Hope you're not still upset about the nursing home situation. Everything's working out for the best." The casual tone of her message, combined with what I'd just discovered, crystallized my resolve. Heather wasn't just making difficult family decisions. She was systematically looting Dad's life while constructing a narrative that justified her actions. She'd convinced herself that she was being generous and practical, when in reality she was stealing from a vulnerable elderly man who trusted her. But she'd made one critical error in her planning. She'd assumed I would remain absent and compliant, grateful for her willingness to handle unpleasant family responsibilities. She'd underestimated the possibility that someone might actually investigate her authority and question her decisions. That assumption was about to cost her everything she thought she'd gained. The next morning brought Natalie's call with the information I'd been expecting, but dreading to hear confirmed. "Your sister's power of attorney is fraudulent," Natalie said without preamble. She filed a response to our document request, but the power of attorney she provided has several problems. The signature doesn't match your father's handwriting from his other legal documents, the notarization is backdated, and most importantly, the document grants her authority that exceeds what's legally permissible without court supervision. I sat in my kitchen, coffee growing cold as I processed this information. So everything she's done is illegal? Technically, yes. Moving your father without proper authority, accessing his bank accounts, disposing of his property. All of it was done without legitimate legal standing. Natalie's tone was professional, but tinged with anger. "This is elder abuse, Ethan. Financial exploitation combined with unlawful confinement. What do we do now? We file for emergency intervention. I can have your father released from the nursing home and returned to his apartment by this afternoon. We can also freeze his bank accounts and demand an accounting of all withdrawn funds." Natalie paused. "But I want to discuss strategy with you first." "What kind of strategy?" "Your sister has committed multiple felonies, but she's also family. You can pursue criminal charges, or you can handle this as a civil matter focused on recovering your father's assets and ensuring his safety. The choice affects how we proceed." I thought about Kyle's uncomfortable expression when confronted with the stolen microwave, about Cheryl's genuine belief that she was receiving generous gifts from a friend. Heather had manipulated everyone, including family members who should have known better. "I want my father safe and his property returned," I said finally. "But I also want Heather to understand the consequences of what she's done." Then we do this methodically and publicly, file all the proper paperwork, document every violation, and make sure there's a clear legal record of her actions. Natalie's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found the perfect strategy. "Your sister seems to care about her professional reputation and social standing. Public exposure of financial elder abuse tends to impact both of those significantly." That afternoon, I met with Patricia Vance at First National Bank, this time accompanied by Natalie and armed with court orders freezing Dad's accounts and demanding a full transaction history. "The power of attorney your sister provided was fraudulent," Natalie explained to Patricia. "We need copies of every document she used to access Mr. Turner's accounts, plus detailed records of all withdrawals and transfers." Patricia's professional composure cracked as she reviewed our paperwork. If the power of attorney was fraudulent, then all these transactions were unauthorized. We're looking at significant liability for the bank. "The bank acted in good faith based on apparently legitimate documentation," Natalie assured her. "But we need your cooperation in tracking where the money went and recovering what we can." The transaction records painted a damning picture. Beyond the large withdrawals, Heather had been systematically draining Dad's accounts through smaller amounts, $300 here for medical supplies, $500 there for apartment maintenance, $750 for nursing home deposits. None of the expenses appeared to have been legitimate. "She's stolen over $15,000 in 6 weeks," I said, studying the printouts. "And that's just from the accounts we know about," Natalie added. "We'll need to check if your father had any other financial assets she might have accessed." While Natalie handled the legal paperwork, I drove to Sunset Manor to prepare Dad for what was about to happen. I found him in the same spot by the window, looking smaller and more confused than he had the previous week. "Ethan, I wasn't sure if you'd come back." His relief was heartbreaking. "I'm getting you out of here, Dad. Today." His face lit up with hope and disbelief. "Really? I can go home?" "Heather didn't have the legal right to put you here in the first place. She forged documents and lied to everyone, including you. I sat beside him, taking his frail hand in mine. But I need you to be strong for what comes next. There's going to be some legal proceedings, and people are going to ask you questions about what Heather told you and what you wanted. Dad's expression hardened with more determination than I'd seen from him in months. She lied to me, Ethan. She said you agreed to send me here, that you were too busy to care about what happened to me. I never agreed to anything. I didn't even know what she was planning. I want to go home, Dad said firmly. I want my apartment back, and I want my things back. I don't care if Heather gets angry. 3 hours later, I helped Dad gather his few belongings from the nursing home room while Natalie completed the discharge paperwork. The staff seemed relieved to see him go. Apparently Dad had been asking daily when his family was coming to take him home, and his obvious distress had been difficult for everyone to witness. As we drove back to his apartment building, Dad stared out the window with the expression of someone returning from exile. "What about my furniture?" he asked. Heather said she was storing it safely, but I saw her loading things into trucks. "We're going to get everything back, Dad. Every single item she took. Even the things she gave to her friends?" I thought about Cheryl's grateful smile, about Kyle's defensive explanation of the extra microwave, about the notebook full of distribution plans I'd found in Dad's bedroom, especially the things she gave to her friends. That evening, while Dad rested in his reclaimed apartment, I made a series of phone calls. First to Kyle, whose number went straight to voicemail. Then to Cheryl's gym, where a receptionist told me Cheryl was dealing with some personal issues and wouldn't be available for the rest of the week. Finally, I called Heather. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I don't know what kind of legal games you're playing, Ethan, but you're making a serious mistake." "The only mistake was trusting you to do the right thing for Dad." "Everything I did was for Dad's benefit. He needed professional care, and he needed his affairs managed by someone competent." Heather's tone carried the righteous indignation of someone who believed her own justifications. "If you think you can swoop in after months of absence and second-guess my decisions, your decisions were based on fraudulent legal documents, Heather. You forged Dad's signature on a power of attorney." Silence stretched across the phone line. When Heather spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, less certain. "I don't know what you think you found, but I have every right to help manage Dad's care. Someone had to make hard decisions while you were off playing project manager. Someone had to steal $15,000 from his bank accounts. Someone had to give away his belongings to your friends. Someone had to lie to him about family meetings that never happened. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you committed elder abuse and financial fraud. I understand that you've been using Dad's apartment as your personal office while telling everyone he's better off in a nursing home." My voice remained level, but the anger was building. "What I don't understand is how you convinced yourself that any of this was acceptable." "Ethan, we need to talk about this properly. There are things you don't know, circumstances that—" "We'll talk in court, Heather. You can explain your circumstances to a judge." I hung up and immediately called Natalie to report the conversation. Within an hour, she'd filed additional paperwork demanding the immediate return of all property removed from Dad's apartment and requesting a full accounting of how Heather had spent his money. My phone buzzed with a flurry of family group chat notifications. Heather had posted a long message about family misunderstandings and legal complications that would be resolved soon. She asked for patience and support during this difficult time and suggested that some family members were making emotional decisions based on incomplete information. The post was followed by supportive comments from friends who clearly had no idea what was really happening. Several people offered help and sympathy, treating Heather as the victim of family drama rather than the perpetrator of financial crimes. But buried among the supportive responses was a comment from Kyle. "Maybe we should return the stuff until this gets sorted out." The comment was quickly deleted, but I'd screenshotted it first. The cracks in Heather's support network were beginning to show. Kyle was getting nervous about his complicity, and Cheryl's sudden unavailability suggested she'd been warned about potential legal consequences. Heather's carefully constructed narrative of family sacrifice was colliding with the reality of criminal liability. Tomorrow would bring the formal legal proceedings, the public documentation of everything she'd done, and the systematic recovery of everything she'd taken. But tonight, Dad was home in his own bed, surrounded by the familiar sounds of his neighborhood instead of the institutional hum of Sunset Manor. It wasn't justice yet, but it was a start. The community room in Dad's apartment building had never hosted anything more dramatic than holiday potlucks and tenant meetings about parking policies. But this morning, it buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded public confrontation. Word had spread through the building about the Turner family situation. and most of the residents had found reasons to attend what Heather had announced as a family meeting to clarify recent misunderstandings. I arrived early with Dad, Natalie, and a banker's box full of documented evidence. Dad looked stronger than he had in weeks, wearing his good shirt and the determined expression of someone who'd decided to stop being pushed around. Natalie arranged her files on the front table with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this many times before. Heather entered at exactly 10 o'clock, flanked by Kyle and followed by Cheryl, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Heather wore her most expensive suit and carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who believed she could still control the narrative. She'd clearly expected a small, private discussion that she could manage through force of personality and selective presentation of facts. Instead, she found 23 building residents, the building manager, a court reporter, and a process server waiting in the audience. "This is supposed to be a family meeting," Heather said, her composure cracking slightly as she took in the crowd. "This is a legal proceeding," Natalie replied calmly. "You're being served with formal charges of elder abuse, financial fraud, and theft. Since your actions affected this entire building community, they have a right to witness the resolution." The process server stepped forward and handed Heather a thick envelope. She accepted it with trembling hands, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Heather Turner Scott," the process server announced in a clear voice that carried throughout the room. "You are hereby served with a civil complaint alleging financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraudulent use of legal documents, unauthorized property conversion, and unlawful confinement." Murmurs rippled through the assembled residents. Mrs. Kowalski from 2B looked shocked, while Linda, the building super, nodded with grim satisfaction. Heather tried to regain control. "There's been a misunderstanding about my authority to help manage Dad's affairs. I have documentation." "You have fraudulent documentation," Natalie interrupted, standing and addressing the room rather than Heather. "Ms. Turner Scott forged her father's signature on a power of attorney document, used that fraudulent document to access his bank accounts and remove 15,300 in unauthorized withdrawals, and systematically disposed of his personal property without his knowledge or consent." Natalie opened her first file and pulled out a stack of bank records. "These transaction records show a pattern of theft spanning 6 weeks, with funds being used for personal expenses rather than Mr. Turner's care." Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Cheryl stared at the floor. "Furthermore," Natalie continued, "Ms. Turner Scott placed her father in a nursing home against his will using false pretenses, telling him that his son had agreed to the placement when no such agreement existed." Dad stood up slowly, using his cane for support. The room fell silent as he faced his daughter. "Heather told me you were too busy to care about me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "She said there had been a family meeting where everyone decided I was too much trouble to live in my own home." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "She lied to me about my own son. She made me believe my family had abandoned me." Heather's professional composure finally cracked completely. "Dad, you were confused. You needed help, and Ethan was never here to provide it. I was trying to do what was best for everyone." "What was best for everyone?" I stood up, pulling out my own documentation. "Let's talk about what was best for everyone." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection screen. The first image that appeared was Heather's social media post from Dad's apartment, showing her sitting in his chair and calling it her new office. "This was posted 3 days after you put Dad in the nursing home," I said. "You weren't managing his affairs, you were claiming his home." The next slide showed the inventory list I'd found in Dad's bedroom, with Heather's handwritten distribution of his belongings. "This is your plan for disposing of Dad's property. Note that none of it was going to Dad. None of it was being saved for his potential return, and none of it was being distributed according to his wishes." I clicked to the next slide. Photos of Dad's belongings in Cheryl's gym office. "This is where Dad's television, microwave, and other appliances ended up. Not in storage for his use, not donated to charity, but given to your friend as personal gifts." Cheryl stood up abruptly. "I didn't know they were stolen. Heather said they were extras that weren't being used." "Sit down, Cheryl," Heather hissed, but her friend was already moving toward the door. "I'm returning everything today," Cheryl announced to the room. "I don't want any part of this." Kyle raised his hand hesitantly. "The microwave at my work. I can bring that back too. I thought it was legitimately donated." "You thought a lot of convenient things, Kyle," I replied. "But you never asked Dad what he wanted done with his belongings." Natalie stepped forward again, pulling out a new set of documents. "Mr. Turner has asked me to read his statement about the impact of his daughter's actions." She unfolded a single sheet of paper and began reading in a clear, professional voice. "For 6 weeks, I believed my son had abandoned me. I believed my family considered me a burden who needed to be hidden away in an institution. I spent every day wondering what I had done wrong, why the people I loved had decided I was no longer worth their time or attention. I learned that none of this was true, that my daughter had lied to me, stolen from me, and given away the possessions that connected me to my late wife and my life history. The emotional damage of believing I was unwanted by my family cannot be undone. The violation of trust cannot be repaired. The room was completely silent now. Several residents were crying. Heather sat frozen, staring at her hands. Natalie continued reading. I am requesting full restitution of all stolen funds, the immediate return of all personal property, and a restraining order preventing my daughter from accessing my home or financial accounts. I am also requesting that these proceedings be made part of the public record so that other elderly residents and their families can understand the warning signs of financial exploitation. I pulled out the final piece of documentation, a folder thick with bank records, property receipts, and witness statements. Every transaction, every removed item, every lie has been documented, I said. The court has already frozen Heather's accounts pending restitution. The nursing home has confirmed that Dad was placed there under false pretenses, and every person who received stolen property has been notified of their legal obligation to return it. Heather finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. Ethan, please, we can work this out privately. I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself to Dad's money and property while convincing everyone you were making a sacrifice. I walked over to the table where Natalie had arranged the final documents. But you made one critical error in your planning. I picked up a set of keys, new keys, cut that morning from the locks that Heather had illegally changed. You assumed Dad's apartment was yours to claim. You assumed his belongings were yours to distribute. You assumed his money was yours to spend. I held up the keys so everyone in the room could see them. But you never actually had legal authority for any of it. I walked over to where Heather sat and placed the keys on the table in front of her. These are the keys to Dad's apartment. The apartment you illegally occupied, the apartment you used as your personal office, the apartment you thought you could claim through fraud and manipulation. I stepped back, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. You don't get to keep them, you don't get to keep anything you took, and you don't get to pretend this was about family sacrifice. Heather stared at the keys, her hands shaking. Kyle had his head in his hands. The room erupted in a mixture of shocked conversations and angry murmurs as the full scope of what had happened became clear to everyone present. I turned and walked toward the door, Dad's hand steady on my arm as we left together. Behind us, the sound of Heather's world collapsing echoed through the community room as 23 neighbors, one building manager, one court reporter, and one process server witnessed the final accounting of her betrayal. The keys lay on the table where I'd left them, glinting under the fluorescent lights, a small silver symbol of everything she'd thought she could steal and everything she'd just lost forever.